Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show today. So today, we're going to be diving in. We're going to be talking about DBAs or doing business as. So a lot of people ask about DBAs when setting up the business and how those relate to business credit building and getting financing. So today, we're going to dive in and we're going to talk more about DBAs, what they are, the benefits, why you may pursue a DBA, and we're also going to talk a little bit more about benefits that DBAs provide, even as it comes to getting business credit financing. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ty Crandall here. I'm the CEO at Credit Suite. At Credit Suite, we help people build business credit. We also help business owners obtain all different kinds of financing. So DBAs are one of the things we come across on a daily basis that have to do with your ability to obtain credit and financing, which is one of the reasons I wanted to tackle this topic today. So what is a DBA? Well, a DBA is particularly helpful in a lot of cases. Well, there's really two main circumstances you may need a DBA. The first is if you're setting up your business initially as a sole proprietorship. Now, DBA stands for doing business as, so that's literally as it translates. And it's basically a fictitious name, also called an assumed business name, filing for your business. As a matter of fact, it's sometimes called you'll fill out something called a fictitious name affidavit. So it's ultimately referred to as a DBA, where you'll oftentimes hear this term of fictitious name mentioned as well. Now, if your name, for example, as a sole proprietorship is Mary Jones, well, you probably don't want that business to be called Mary Jones, particularly when you're trying to create a business to build business credit or just for credibility reasons, which is one of the reasons that people choose a DBA when they're a sole proprietor. So when looking at business credit score, let me kind of go back a little bit. So this is one of the primary reasons that I see people choose DBAs. They come in as a sole proprietor. So for example, there are states like California where it's very expensive to file a corporation. It could cost you $600 to $1,000. So people come in and are a sole proprietor where they are the business. The problem is they don't want their name to be the business name. So they use a DBA so they can still be a sole proprietor and use the actual name that they choose to be the business name. Now, when looking at business credit score versus personal credit, well, a lender is going to be confused if your name and that of your business are identical, particularly if you're a sole proprietor. So when business and credit are mixed, which affects your business credit score, and most when you're building business credit, anything to do with business credit building, then it really creates a lot of issues. But a DBA takes that confusion out of the equation, because if you're a sole proprietor, the DBA is the business name that you're doing business as. So again, it just helps you avoid using your actual name to be your business name, which creates all kinds of issues when you're building business credit. And it also creates all kinds of issues if you're out there promoting your name as your business name, trying to get business. So again, what happens is that means that certain credit reporting agencies, the IRS, lenders, credit issuers, a lot of the people that are involved in the process of getting you money, it becomes more difficult to obtain that financing when you're actually using your name as the company name instead of a DBA. So for a one-person operation, you might have a company name, but the general public doesn't need to know your name. So if the name of your business is Susan's Flowers, well, you'll need a DBA because, again, there's probably more than one person named Susan in your area, as an example. But if you call your business Susan Smith's Flowers, you might be able to get away without a DBA. So again, a DBA helps you kind of break it down into a company name that's available. And you don't run into this if you're filing like a corporation. If you're filing a corporation in a state like Florida, for example, there's only one corporation in Florida that could be named Credit Suite. So since we have that name, nobody else can ever come in and get that same name in the state. But DBAs, a lot of people can have very similar or even the same DBAs. So that means, in this example, if you were using Susan's Flowers, well, then again, there could be other Susan Flowers even available in your state with that same actual name or DBA, which is why you want to be a little bit more specific when it comes to that. Again, it won't hurt to have a DBA in either situation, but if you really want to nail it down and be very specific and have something unique, sometimes it will help. So the public has a vested interest in knowing who actually owns the business, which is due to liability issues. So if you own a restaurant and someone gets food poisoning, well, they don't know you own the Parkway Diner without a DBA, for example. So again, I can go on, but there are so many problems with being a sole proprietor and your name being the business name, which is why probably one of the most common uses of DBAs really does have to do with actually being used by sole proprietors. Now, a DBA is also a better choice for tax issues and business credit issues because, again, trying to build business credit, trying to file taxes, trying to do all the legal things and the obtaining financing and everything under your personal name as your business name is very, very, very problematic. But again, a DBA helps separate some of this because your name is basically separate from the business name. And a DBA, sometimes if your name is in it, will actually even let the public know who owns the business. And again, I'm not big on this, right? If I'm going to build a business, I don't want my name to be the business. I don't want my name to be out there in the space as being the business name, which is one of the reasons that DBAs just makes so much sense. So according to LegalZoom, the most significant use of a DBA is the ability for a sole proprietorship to open a business bank account and collect money using a name other than its actual legal name. So hence, it's a vital part of the financial side of any business. So whether it be getting loans, building business credit, IRS filings, especially bank accounts, again, by having a DBA, your sole proprietorship, the company that you're filing under doesn't just have to be your name. Now, a DBA can't use the terms Inc. or incorporated, corporation, incorporation, or corp unless it's actually a corporation. So just some legal details to know. Some states require fictitious name or DBA filings as a form of consumer protection. So some states require you have a DBA because they don't want your company name to be out there as your name. So they do that to provide some layer of consumer protection. So another legality in some states you should look into. And in some states, you go to the county clerk's office and pay a fee, or you go to the state agency to set up a DBA. In Florida, like most states, you can do this right at your Secretary of State website. So when you're setting up any entity, a corporation, a sole proprietorship, if you want to be a sole proprietorship, which isn't really called an official entity, but if you're setting up your business as a sole proprietorship and a corporation, LLC, you can do all that with your Secretary of State. You can also file DBAs or fictitious names with your Secretary of State. This saves you a ton of money. You can go to a company like LegalZoom and pay them to do it for you. But I assure you, if you're somewhat good with computers, you can go to your Secretary of State. And in many states, it's very simple to set up an entity and very simple to file a fictitious name if you know a fictitious name is the term that you're looking for. So again, in others, you have to take an advertisement out in the local newspaper for a particular amount of time. So states have some weird requirements where some of them will make you take an advertisement out to see if anybody else is using that name. And other particulars, it's not common, but it does happen. So some legalities and things you need to know about DBAs that you may run into out there. Now, your bank, again, may require a DBA when you open the bank account. Even if you don't think you need a DBA, it may be required. So don't get frustrated. I've learned in my experience that when lenders, credit issuers, banks want you to do something, it's probably a good idea and in your best interest to do it. Because usually those things are going to make it easier for you to obtain financing credit as you grow. When you ignore their advice, then you start running into all kind of pitfalls when you grow. So even if you don't think you need it, keep in mind when banks and the IRS and the business credit reporting agencies all are preferring that you have it, it probably makes a lot of sense that you do it. And this is one of the reasons that a lot of people use sole proprietorships with DBAs in states like California. It's just cheap. It doesn't cost as much. You know, it costs you a fraction of the amount of money. Now, in other states like Texas or Florida, for example, it doesn't really matter. I can set up a corporation here in Florida for $70. So it doesn't really matter. The cost isn't an issue in almost any scenario. But in other states where it's $600 to $1,000, the sole proprietor and the DBA is just a better way to go. So keep that in mind when you're actually setting up the DBA initially. So there are some clients who might require you to have a DBA in order to enter into a contract with them. If a freelancer, for example, if you're bidding on actual contracts, well, they may require that you actually have a DBA or a business name on the contract, not as an individual. So again, some more circumstances here where this can be required, whether you choose to get one or not. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of benefits of why you'd probably want to get a DBA. It's simple, it's inexpensive, and as a sole proprietor, filing a DBA is the cheapest way to set up an entity, which again, in some states, it doesn't matter because it's so cheap to set up a corporation, but in other states it does. And to be able to use a real business name, it tends to be the cheapest and easiest way to go in some states without having to file or having to form an LLC or a corporation, which again, to me, it all comes down to the money. If you're in a state like Florida where it's $70 or less than $100 to set up an entity like a corporation, go that route. I'm telling you, it's so much better for business credit building purposes and legal. Even though I'm not an attorney, the problem with a sole proprietor is that you are the business. So if the business gets sued, you get sued as well. A corporation creates some level of protection there because if they sue the business, they can't sue you as an individual. They can just go after the business and the business asset. So there's a ton of benefits if given a choice of going with a corporation or even going with an LLC over a sole proprietorship. If you're going to file a sole proprietorship, one of the only benefits I can even think of to do so is because it may be expensive in your state to file another entity. And if that's the case, that's okay. You may have a good business idea. You may want to get it off the ground. You may choose the cheapest path forward, which is a sole proprietor with a DBA, cost you very little money compared to filing an expensive corporation in a state where it's expensive like California. Then you test the concept works. And then what you do is you just actually set up your entity from there using the profits of the growing business. That's a good way to do it. So again, I'm all about starting a business as cheap as you possibly can. So if you're in a state where it's really expensive to set up a corporation or set up an LLC, well, then this isn't a bad way to go. Set up a sole proprietorship, get yourself a DBA, go that route, prove concept. And one of the first things you should pay for then is a real entity, because if you don't choose an entity like an LLC or a corporation, you have a lot of personal liability if the business were to get sued. Again, not an attorney, but just from everything I know and understand. And the second aspect is that you also can make sure that it's much easier for you to obtain things like business credit and financing and even separating the liability when it comes to getting business credit. So sole proprietorship issues. The SBA says the sole proprietor is an unincorporated business owned and run by one person. There's no material difference between the business and its owner. Therefore, the owner will enjoy all of the profits or loss of the business. So sole proprietors are also responsible for all the business's debts, losses, and liabilities. All that carries over to you as an individual. And I can tell you, running in business is inherently very, very risky. The reason I got into the business credit space is because the first business I ever owned was a mortgage company at the height of the mortgage industry. When the whole thing collapsed, it pushed me near personal bankruptcy. And since I personally guaranteed everything in the business, that's why it happened, because all the creditors for the business came after me personally because I signed as a personal guarantor. So again, there's a lot of problems being personally responsible for the debts, the losses, the liabilities. Business credit gives you a way around that, but business credit can't even protect you if you're a sole proprietor, because you and the business are one and the same, and you are liable for all these things. So by separating your personal and business credit in life, then the owner has a lever of protection. You could have some kind of protection of your personal assets. So for example, in my world, I was a corporation. If I would have built business credit and avoided a personal guarantee, we would have weathered the storm just fine, because the business debts wouldn't have affected our personal assets. But instead, when we had to start to default on the business debts, they cleared out all of our personal assets, which created severe harm on us on our personal side. So again, that's why I teach about business credit. I want other people to know these things so you can avoid the heartaches that I've had to go through learning this the hard way. So otherwise, if the business goes bankrupt and there aren't enough funds to pay all the contractors, then what they do is they're ultimately coming after your personal assets, which is something that you and I both need to make sure that we're preventing for you in the business. So IRS requirements. The IRS treats a DBA as an extension of a sole proprietor in a lot of cases. Therefore, unless you're not a sole proprietor, therefore there is no need for a separate EIN for the business. So keep that in mind. You know, you could be a sole proprietor. You could have a DBA. As a lot of people ask me, can you still build business credit? The answer is no, you can't, because business credit is built under an EIN number. You probably aren't going to have an EIN number if you're a sole proprietor as a DBA. So keep that in mind. There's no need for an EIN. So a lot of people set up a sole proprietor and a DBA. Everything carries over to their personal social tax-wise, so they don't set up an EIN. Remember, no EIN, no business credit. So you can't get away without having one, but you'll want to have one in order to build business credit, even though you don't particularly need an actual EIN as you set up a business. And if you're choosing a sole proprietor, you don't, then it will adversely affect your ability to build business credit. So what if your business is a corporation or an LLC? Well, if that's the case, and the IRS already says those are separate entities from you as an individual, they will need an EIN, and that alleviates the need for a DBA. Again, I'm going to talk here in a minute about the second most common use of a DBA. A lot of corporations, a lot of LLCs also use DBAs, but you don't really need one because, again, you have the separation of name, you have a separate EIN in the business, these type of things. But again, you can still use a DBA. There's still a lot of reasons that people do. So when you operate a business by yourself, you can continue the confusion if you commingle the accounts, float a business loan, sign checks for your account using your business account. And this is the problem with sole proprietorships, is that there's so much of this commingling of business and personal accounts, expenses. And here's why that's a problem. Because if you want to get money for your business, you need to create separation. I can tell you that we have people that come in to try to get business loans and have the revenue to qualify, but they're running their money through personal bank accounts and they can't get approved. So again, you don't want this commingling, because by separating expenses and separating bank accounts, then what happens is it becomes easier for you. It opens up more windows of opportunity for you to obtain business financing as well. So again, when you apply for business credit, credit issuers are naturally going to look at your personal credit because, again, if you are the business, that's kind of goes with the territory. But again, if you're separate, then you're creating an environment where they could just look at your business credit profile and not your personal credit profile to get you approved. So a DBA is also the easiest way to register your business if you produce craft items and sell on Etsy or storefronts at places like eBay or Amazon or these type of things, which are becoming very popular. So you'll need a DBA to be able to open up a business account in your company's name and receive payments or bills or pay bills when it comes to Amazon and eBay. And these are some other scenarios that you may need one. Now, for your one-person operation on Etsy, that's a lot more impressive if you can call it Dragon Tea Cozies rather than Sarah Smith's Etsy store. So again, a lot of benefits when DBAs relate over to this new world we're seeing of Amazon sellers, which is becoming a huge industry in itself. So whether it be Etsy or eBay or Amazon, again, it just gives you more professional image if you're able to choose one of those actual business names instead. Now, you can also use a DBA to operate several businesses at once. Second most common reason I see DBAs. So far, I've talked a lot about all the things you should know as a sole proprietor filing a DBA, because it's the most popular reason people get DBAs. We just saw that per SBA, right? This is the most popular reason. The second most popular reason I see people use DBAs comes down to this, because people want to operate several businesses or several brand names at once. So you can create a corporation which will use the DBA, and this is useful if you open new branches, new websites, new brands, etc. So you can run the East Market, the West Market, the Central City Market, for example, all at the exact same time. So another use for these kinds of multiple DBA situations is one business is incorporated and another one's not. If you use a different name when signing contracts or leases, you may lose the protections to get from being incorporated. So another reason you may want to do a DBA versus multiple entities, one of which isn't a corporation. But by using a DBA structure, you're fine. It's the same thing. It's just you're using a fictitious name. It's just you're still got the protections of a corporation, but you're using a DBA maybe to do business as a different brand for whatever reasons that you may actually see fit. So another use for a DBA is for the same person or group to run several different types of businesses, because as a corporation or LLC, you may expand to new areas. You may roll out new products, for example. Okay, so this is one of the biggest things. So at Credit Suite, we have a lot of different brands that we have out in the space, and these are DBAs because we don't want to file taxes under multiple companies, right? So because of that, we file everything under one actual entity. So Credit Suite is our corporation name. And then we have other brands, for example, Wentworth Price. Wentworth Price is another one of our brands that we don't really use for any reason whatsoever right now, but eventually we may use it. So we have multiple of these DBA brands that we've created. We've got logos, we've got brand branding, and they're seasoning. They have social media pages, they have websites, and they just gain seasoning. And then for certain projects we may use in the future, we can choose any of these already pre-built brands. It's fantastic. Okay, but the problem is we wouldn't want to pay taxes every single year on all these different entities as if they were their own, or different brands as if they were their own entities. Annual reports in Florida alone are $400 a year per entity. So if we had Wentworth Price, which we've never done anything with for 5 years since we created it, well, we wouldn't want to spend thousands of dollars in annual reports, file tax returns every year, all the things that we'd have to do with an entity when we could just put it under a DBA, still keep the brand, and eventually if we ever want to make it its own entity, we always can. So again, having a more descriptive name could be helpful. So for example, we're Credit Suite. Well, we got Wentworth Price because we said, if we ever want to more aggressively move into the financing world, we probably don't want the word credit in our name, because those people that want loans aren't going to think about Credit Suite as being a place for loans. So this is where, again, a more descriptive name, more details like that can help you. So when I owned my credit repair business, the credit repair business name was Elite Credit. Well, when we got into business credit, we had another DBA called Elite Business. So then that way we separated it. Elite Credit was our credit repair consumer side. And then our DBA was Elite Business because we could actually function that as under a different name under this exact same entity. So having a more descriptive name in the DBA can be helpful for your customers to know what you do without having to set up a different entity, because you're basically building multiple brands under one umbrella using DBAs. So multiple DBAs allow for this. So your Friendly Corporation, for example, might be doing business as Dragon Tea Cozies, Susan's Flowers, and the Good Vibes Nightclub all at the same time. So again, this is very big. A lot of people want to do this for a lot of different reasons. They have a lot of good ideas. They want names that are very specific to what they do, so their customers know that Dragon Tea Cozies, that's what they sell. Susan's Flowers, you sell flowers. Good Vibes Nightclub, you're a nightclub. Well, then you can put them all under one entity, only have one entity to pay taxes on, only have one entity to manage, one entity to file annual reports on, one entity to manage the business credit of, but you have all these different other names that you're doing business as under. So one of the most popular reasons that we see DBA. So the steps for getting started with the DBA vary from state to state. You want to check your Secretary of State's website for the details. In Colorado, for example, they do a DBA, a trade name. You can see right here is the actual link. The sos.state.co.us is Colorado's Secretary of State. Massachusetts, for example, getting a DBA is one of the Secretary of State's list of what a new business needs to do in order to get started. So you can go to www.mass.gov and you can kind of learn a little bit more on that. So again, this is kind of the issue. All states call it something different. Here in Florida, we call it a fictitious name filing. And again, other places you can see here call it a trade name. Others, it's part of their process to ask you about DBAs. They're all different, but one thing is the same. You could do it all with your Secretary of State. You don't need a LegalZoom type company to do this unless you want that extra layer of support. So again, a lot of things we talked about today. First of all, when you have a DBA, you minimize confusion in a sole proprietor situation, which is a big deal. You do not want your name to be the business name you put out in the public space for a million different reasons. Creates IRS issues, creates bank account issues, creates business credit building and lending issues, creates credibility issues with customers. You can't get contracts in a lot of situations. You don't look credible on Etsy and Amazon and eBay if you're running one of those kind of stores. So a lot of reasons that you want to minimize confusion by having a DBA, a business name that's front facing. It's different than your name if you're a sole proprietor. It also helps you protect your personal assets better. It just separates it. If you're a sole proprietor using a DBA, you're still going to be liable for what goes on, but there's some layer of protection because the people that may sue you don't necessarily know your name if you're operating under a DBA. So some layer of protection. You retain corporate benefits if your company is incorporated. And again, a lot of benefits. when you're a corporation. You separate the liability. You make it harder to get sued personally for things that happen in the business. You can have a direct business name, things you just can't get unless you have a DBA, if you're not an actual entity like a corporation. So it better separates personal from business. Again, very helpful for building business credit. You're not going to be able to build business credit under your own personal name, but with the DBA you can. And it also, just most importantly, gives your company legitimacy as well. So a lot of different reasons you want to file a DBA, a lot of benefits. I'm going to check real quick here and just see if I can, sunbiz.org. The problem with being live is you never know what's going to happen here. Anything can actually happen. So I'm going to look and just see. So I'm looking at the Secretary of State records right here for Florida. And I just wanted to see if you could see anything about, so here you go. So you can see right here, popular task, fictitious name registration. Right here is Florida's process. So again, everybody calls it something different, and I've given you a few different names that states go off of. But guys, this was in real time. I don't know where this is, and it took me about 10 seconds to find on my Secretary of State website the process to do this. Now, Florida's pretty business friendly down here. A lot aren't. And then I come in, Florida fictitious name. To file a fictitious name must be advertised at least once in a newspaper. So here's that newspaper requirement. The name you register must be advertised at least once in a newspaper that's located within the county where your principal place of business is located. However, proof of advertisement is not required. You, the applicant, certify the name has been advertised when you sign the application. This is perfect. It's like a real world example of what we just talked about here. So they're saying it's required, but we don't make you prove it. So again, you can run a small ad, run the company's name to be able to do a DBA. Second, review the instructions for filing. 3, gather all the information, have a valid form of payment. So let's check this out here and see if it says how much it's actually going to be, which it doesn't say right here how much it's going to be. So we can see here, register a Florida fictitious name. We come through, this form is a fictitious name. Fictitious name registration does not satisfy workman comp, does not require. So you can see there's a lot of requirements here. Yes, I read them. I'm doing what everybody does. And then here we go. There's the application. Right? The name, the EIN that you want, the address, the business owner's information here. It looks like there's a lot, but there's not. They're asking for name and address number 1 of the owner. If you're the only owner, you'd only fill this out. You wouldn't need the number 2. You wouldn't need the number 3. You wouldn't need the number 4 or 5 section. So it's pretty simple. It would just be a matter of filling out this information here, filling out the owner's information here, and then filling out this information here, signing, and then moving on to actually pay. So again, in real time, this is what it looks like. It's pretty simple. You find the fictitious name registration on the website, you fill it out with a little bit of information, and then you're able to actually file the fictitious name. So if you have any other questions on DBAs, why you'd want a DBA, how to use them, those type of things, feel free to give us a ring. 877-600-2487. That's 877-600-2487. info@creditsuite.com. Remember, try to go with a corporation or an LLC if you can. If you can't because of money and you have to choose a sole proprietor, then at least get a DBA to have some layer of protection, and know that as soon as that business starts making money, you need to make one of your first investments to move up to a corporation or LLC. That way you really have a real business name that's not a DBA, and that way you really separate true liability between your business and you personally, and have some layer of protection if your business ever gets sued, and to build business credit. So you can obtain all types of credit without the personal guarantee and personal liability as well, things you can't do as a sole proprietor. But also keep in mind that if you have multiple brands that you want to bring out, multiple lines of products and services that you want to offer, don't go set up a bunch of entities. You may not know this now, but it becomes a nightmare to manage and very expensive. Even if your business doesn't generate revenue, you still have to file tax returns. You have to pay an accountant hundreds of dollars to do that if you aren't qualified to do it on your own. You have to pay annual reports. Then that costs, like I said, in Florida, $400, and we're pretty cheap down here. So it can cost you thousands of dollars to maintain an entity. No need to. Go ahead and use DBAs for that purpose as well. So any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, 877-600-2487 or info@creditsuite.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.